I went to work for so long, like 2 hours, just figuring it through. I was in my trenches.
Man, I can't
And I thought,
it's like,
yeah, I'm just gonna go in and if they're watching, looking the way I want.
Alrighty. Well, we have some things to take care of today. Attendance looks to be appalling. I just noticed that. I'm not brooding on it or anything. It does look to be appalling. So.
The few, the proud, and the persistent.
Okay, good. But it's sad because today would not be I don't know. Today would obviously not be a very good day to prepare for our final project or to spend any time worrying about that at all. But I do have 3 copies, and I think I emailed this out to everybody. I emailed today's lecture notes out to everybody, and I also emailed out some basic information, really just lists of names of people involved in our final project. Okay, and I have 3 copies of that, and I'd like to leave 1 copy with our Team 1 leader, 1 copy with our Team 2 leader, I guess, and then probably 1 I should have made 4 copies, but anyway. I want the non-anthropocentric group to have their own coordinator and the non-anthropocentric environmentalist, right? It's a very convenient way of dividing up environmentalist perspectives, I think. Just divide them right off the bat into more than environmentalists and more than anthropocentric environmentalists, and then your more old school, familiar anthropocentric environmentalists. So that's what we'll do. And it turns out the social ecologists, the social ecology, deep ecology way of organizing our material also lends itself to that kind of convenient categorization where the social ecologists are easily grouped among the anthropocentric environmentalists, at least the strategically anthropocentric environmentalists, and the deep ecologists are grouped among the adamant and pretty much totally committed, more than anthropocentric, ecological, holist environmentalists, right? Okay? So that's how I have our final project divided up. It turns out there are 10 people so far, right? And this class I wish was full today because, you know, I want to know who the hell is, you know, I suspect, you know, there'll be a couple more who haven't, you know, there's some serious slackers and serious people who have been conditioned to think that their college education is some kind of a mail it in, I don't know what the hell they think, but anyway. So I'm a little bit discouraged at attendance today because I kind of want to get this stuff finalized and hammered out, you know, and get you guys breaking up into your groups and preparing for this, for our final project. But I can't really do that when we don't have everyone signed up. So anyway, I think today I should just focus now on the material for today. Yes?
If more don't sign up, are we just going to default to that alone writing thing?
No, of course not, man. No, so far, no, absolutely not. Our final project's going to go ahead, man. You are our electricity consumers representative, dude, right? I mean,
yeah.
You're going to go full bore in favor of, you know, you're going to say, hey, man, you know, we got to keep these dams in place because I represent these household, you know, mom and pop utility customers who, absolutely, man. So yeah, no, you're going to play your role, and you are among, you know, obviously you have utilitarian work cut out for you. You have consequentialist analysis cut out for you. You've got to carry the day in terms of consequentialist analysis of consequences of removing or leaving in place the 4 lower snake dams, right? You've got to demonstrate that the consequences of leaving in place and continuing to reap the hydropower benefits of the 4 lower snake dam and navigation benefits of the 4 lower and irrigation benefits, right, are all good. Well, with you it's just hydropower benefits because you're going to represent. Anyway, yeah, no, absolutely, we're going to go forward, but I just think we'll wait until Thursday. All right, today we've got quite a bit of material to get through, and I want to get back. I've spent pretty much the whole weekend thinking about this rather startling solution. Yes?
I'm so pleased about the project anyway, but can I make a suggestion that might help, even if it's like, right, how about make a 3rd group that's dedicated towards like a news position that questions both sides?
No, we're going to only have 2 groups.
Just a suggestion.
Sorry. No, you know, I mean, we want to keep things simple, and we want to keep things as approximate to reality as possible. Now, reality might still be very far away, but at least we're trying to be close. If there was to be a hearing on the future of the Lower Snake River and its watersheds and the Lower Snake dams, that hearing would be held in front of Congress. And there would be one group petitioning for, not petitioning, but one group, would have a vested interest and would be arguing strongly in favor. And that group would be divided up into anthropocentric environmentalists. They would be the biggest group probably, because those are the arguments that Congress seems most interested in. But there would also be more than anthropocentric. In terms of a third group, I just don't see that realistically happening in our institutional framework, you know what I mean? And I want to try to mimic. Our goal with this final project is to bring back to Earth, bring back to the political world, these more esoteric and exotic moral philosophical theories regarding the value of natural resources that we've been studying, okay? So we want to try to keep things as simple as possible with our final project. In any event, we'll just wait till Thursday to put it together a little more carefully. I will send our team leaders home with a copy of this. But by the way, though, who in this room right now has not signed up to play a role in our final project and our final group presentations and wants to do that? Okay, but we've already signed you up. You weren't here on Thursday, but you know that you already volunteered to your Corey Knudsen.
Yeah.
And you've already volunteered to be Team 1 leader.
Okay.
Team 1 is we've got policy option 1, which is status quo.
Yeah.
Keep the dams in place, keep all the other dams in place, keep trying, to do your best to mitigate, repair habitat where you can, etc., more spills, etc., but keep them in place, right? And then Team 2 is breach the dam things. They're totally worthless, they never really amounted to much, and they don't produce a lot of hydropower. The navigation benefits can be replaced by rail transit, et cetera, et cetera. Now, those are all the utilitarian kinds of consequentialist arguments. And then on top of that, we have these amazing genetic lineages and these intrinsic values that we need to worry about. Of course, those are the more than anthropocentric arguments, right? And that's why we have divided up the environmental anti-dam team into so be aware, those of you who signed up, for example, to be Group A conservationists, you've got your work cut out for you to present the anthropocentric consequentialist argument for tearing down the dams, right? Sorry, for keeping the, yeah, and that includes Arthur Jackson, Jason Riggin. All right, you guys have identified yourself. You want to be, and you have been signed up to be Group A conservationists, and that means you guys are going to be mustering all the pro-dam, anthropocentric, utilitarian, Group A conservationist arguments that all revolve right around navigation benefits and hydropower benefits, really. And there aren't any flood control benefits, so that's too bad. You probably wish there were. But, and then you wise users can kind of supplement, right? But you guys are the more rabid kind of, you guys have the metaphysical hammer to bring down too, right? The humans are #1, right? Anyway, and so that's how it's going to go, all right? But let's get more specific about this on Thursday. Who else has not signed up? Who else in this room right now wants to and is intending to do the group presentation rather than the written final exam and has not? I'll tell you right off the bat, we need more deep ecologists. I've kind of forcibly put our friend Tyler, where's Tyler? There you are. In the deep ecologists. He wanted to be represent more of the indigenous perspective, and I still, you can do that too. And perhaps the deep ecologists, we don't have somebody who's more qualified, and that's always kind of sensitive, to represent the indigenous point of view. Anyway, is that okay if I ask you to represent the deep ecology? And so far, we don't have any other deep ecologists. So I'm expecting that some stragglers and some strays are going to turn up before all is said and done. Probably on Thursday, there'll be some, and I'll have kind of a dismayed expression on my face on Thursday. You'll know, those of you who are here today will notice that on Thursday, when those people who aren't here today turn up on Thursday, and some of those people who aren't here today turn up on Thursday will not have signed up and their names won't here, and then of course you'll see a little bit of dismay. But I will try to hide that and maintain a brave face, and I will get those people to sign up, and those people will be more forceful, will have far less choice over what role they can play, because they've kind of been out of the loop, through their own negligence and their own their own lack of seriousness about their education. Right? That upsets me. Lack of seriousness about education upsets me. But then, if it's a function of economic circumstances, because everyone's working 50 hours a week, then I don't know how the hell to respond to that. But anyway, your education's supposed to be #1, right? your philosophy class really should be number one in your education, because philosophy makes you smarter. Thinking about thinking makes you smarter. So if you want to prioritize things, this is your only philosophy class, this really should be your top priority. But anyway, I realize that isn't the case for many people. I meant to, at some point today, we're going to get into this issue. We have to try to get introduced to social ecology as a coherent, comprehensive, viable, and perhaps compelling environmental ethic and alternative to deep ecology. We have to spend some time on social ecology today. But I also want to get to this, continue talking about lower snake dam removal and this business of, this argument, a solution has been presented by one of our class, by one of our community members. A solution to anthropogenic, not a solution obviously, but a response to anthropogenic climate destabilization that involves the total instrumentalization of water resources in the Snake River Basin. So the argument that we heard, was that you that presented the argument? No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at, was that you that, who, I think he's not here today. I'm sorry, I'm not good with faces and I need glasses, so people who are sitting far away, especially I'm not good with names and faces. I refuse to submit to glasses, but anyway, I want to explore, okay? We're making progress, and I'm very happy with that. I feel really good about, the level at which this class is approaching our material and the kind of philosophical developments that I'm encountering, whether you are or not. Now you're going to encounter them too. But the argument is presented that Earth's climate systems require instrumentalization of Columbia Basin, of Snake River water resources. So I want to get into that question, all right? I keep thinking I want to read an excerpt from Martin Heidegger's memorial address, famous, no, I'm not sure this is it. Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, it is, okay. Martin Heidegger is a German phenomenologist and existentialist, and he invested some time and energy and thought into thinking about thinking, which philosophers do, as you know. I don't know if I should, never mind, I'm not going to get into this, all right? But I do want eventually to get into the question of, what's this nonsense? So, all right. I want to address this argument, okay? I don't know. I don't have an answer to this argument. But the provocative argument was made last Thursday that the circumstances of Earth's climate systems are so dire and so of such urgent concern that all hydropower generating resources need to be taken advantage of, and the hydropower benefits they provide need to be maximized, okay? So that means, to take a specific instance of the Snake River Basin, which is just roughly half of the Columbia River Basin, right? Needs to be, okay? The argument is that the water resources of the Snake River Basin need to be fully instrumentalized, okay? Because not taking advantage of the hydropower resource, the full, complete hydropower resources of the Snake River Basin will amount to having to sacrifice some of the integrity and stability of Earth's climate systems, right? So we've got an ecological whole against an ecological whole, right? That's the argument. The ecological whole of Snake River water resources, right, which are necessary to the ecological whole of Snake River salmon resources, right? Right? That's one ecological whole we're considering. The other ecological whole is so it's claimed, and rightly so, much more comprehensive. Earth's climate systems as a whole, more comprehensive. However vast the Columbia Basin salmon ecosystem is, or the Snake River water salmon ecosystem is, certainly Earth's climate systems are vaster still, right, and more encompassing, right? And so the argument is that in order to protect Earth's climate system, resource managers in the Pacific Northwest need to maximize hydropower generation and utilization of water resources in the Snake River Basin. Okay, you get the argument, right? Okay, so that's the argument I want to explore, and that's the kind of argument that I'm hoping both sides, Team 1 and Team 2 in our final project, will spend some time thinking about. Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about that argument today, too. All right? And more, so I'll anticipate just a little bit more about that before I get into social ecology. I want you guys to start thinking about those two examples that we discussed when we were talking about Tom Regan, right? Remember, Tom Regan was our introduction. I know we've gotten into deontological arguments and the whole neo-Kantian a little bit, right? But that was supposed to be our formal introduction to neo-Kantianism and deontological moral philosophy, right? Was that day that we spent on Tom Regan. And you'll recall that two moral struggles were featured that day. They were both hypothetical moral struggles. They weren't real world examples. But one of them was the chimpanzee to human heart transplant, and the other one was the moral struggle introduced by Tom Regan himself, which was the lifeboat example. Okay, you remember that? We had the lifeboat example, and then we had my own example, my own moral struggle that I put together. And that's totally hypothetical because medical science hasn't gotten that far yet, right? That's not realistic. You couldn't use a chimp. But we're supposed to imagine that you could, right? Anyway, remember those two examples that I talked about the day we talked about Tom Regan? And remember I talked about how Tom Regan can be interpreted to a couple of different ways. There's this very stringent reading of Tom Regan, and then there's the probably more widely accepted reading of Tom Regan. The more widely accepted reading of Tom Regan's deontological argument is that he makes allowances whenever human vital needs are at stake. So because of his worse off principle, remember? Because humans are worse off. So he uses this lifeboat example to illustrate and to drive home his point that he's not saying that humans are just exactly the same as all other subjects, all other animals, right? Who are subjects of lives. He's saying humans are still a little more important because death and pain matter more to them. So when humans die or when humans suffer, they're worse off, right, than when a non-human animal dies or when a non-human animal suffers. So anyway, but you'll recall that in the lifeboat example, Tom Regan was able to justify, and you might have thought, well, that's a relief, throwing the dog overboard, right? Because in the lifeboat example, the resource manager had no choice but to instrumentalize one of the parties on the boat, on the lifeboat, right? Remember that? If you don't instrumentalize the dog by throwing the dog overboard, then you're going to have to instrumentalize one of the humans, right? Instrumentalization is just part of your option, wherever you turn, right? But remember the chimpanzee example, where instrumentalization of the human who's sick, right? Remember the human has a heart condition, has heart disease, right? And then the human desperately needs some new heart from somewhere, right? And medical science has evolved, adapted, improved to the point where that human who's sick, I think his name was Dave, right? Uncle Dave can be cured, be healed, and be given 15, 20 or more years of life, right? Maybe Uncle Dave is a talented musician, songwriter, artist of some kind, and so we probably ought to promote that idea. If there's some way we can keep him alive for another 15, that's great, right? And lo and behold, it turns out we can. All we have to do is harvest this chimpanzee's heart. The chimpanzee comes from a laboratory. You know, he has some people and other animals that love him, but not very many. And of course, the human would be much worse off if the human is allowed to just die from his heart condition, right? So let's do it, right? And it could be that Tom Regan's argument allows for that, where vital human interests are at stake, and humans can be saved, and human lives can be saved. Then we ought to, right? That could be one. Right, and of course that's still very narrow. That still rules out a whole bunch of exploitations of non-human animals that mainstream society, you know, routinely commits. Right, it rules out meat eating. It rules out wearing leather shoes. Right, it rules out anyway. But at least it allows for where a vital human need, where a human life can be saved. It allows for instrumentalizing a non-human animal, right? So that could be one interpretation, and in that interpretation, guess what? If that's what the deontologist means, and let's plug in two ecological holes, not a human and a German Shepherd, not 4 humans and a German Shepherd, right? That was the lifeboat example. The lifeboat can only take 4 bodies of 125 pounds, right? And you've got 425-pound humans and 125-pound dog. In any event, somewhere, one of those bodies needs to be instrumentalized, right? So anyway, but with the chimpanzee example, the point was that the alternative to going ahead with the transplant operation, right? That's what we're thinking about here. Is it morally right for Uncle Dave to go along with the transplant operation? The alternative, right? In the lifeboat, the alternatives is, well, you're going to have to instrumentalize one of these humans, right? Okay, and so Regan says, well, because those humans are going to be worse off, we just have to throw the dog overboard, right? And he justifies that through his worse off principle. But when I introduced the example of the chimpanzee, I was trying to point out to all of you that I think Regan is probably making a more stringent. He's not just saying wherever humans see an opportunity to save human lives, they ought to go ahead and instrumentalize animals, right? Still be vegetarians, you know, still eliminate zoos, eliminate circuses, right? Eliminate all that stuff, right? But wherever there's an opportunity to save a human life by instrumentalizing a non-human, they ought to go ahead and do that, right? That sounds like a pretty reasonable argument. But the more stringent reading of Regan's argument is that that's not what he's saying. In fact, what he's saying is that instrumentalization is the grave moral wrong. And in a situation where the alternative does not involve instrumentalization of a subject of a life, right, or whatever it is that has that moral status, right, then allowing the human to just die is morally okay. In fact, is morally the right thing to do. Right? So in the chimpanzee example, not harvesting the chimpanzee's heart does not entail instrumentalization of Uncle Dave, right? And so under this more stringent and I think more pure and more really true to Kantian Kant's original argument, if we're going to adapt them, right, and consider chimpanzees to also have intrinsic value and this moral status that Kant talks about. I think it's clearly a more pure argument and probably more an accurate appraisal of what Regan really means. Okay? So instrumentalization of a being who is a subject of a life is the real test of the moral rightness or wrongness of an act, right? And whether human lives are lost or not is not really an issue unless the loss of that human life is the result of a willful decision that involves instrumentalization of that human, right? But in the case of the chimpanzee to human heart transplant, there is no such willful instrumentalization of Uncle Dave going on, right? You're just letting Uncle Dave succumb to the natural consequences of his heart disease, right? You're not instrumentalizing him at all. You're just letting you're letting his disease take its course, right? Whereas killing the chimpanzee and harvesting her heart is always necessarily an instrumentalization of the chimpanzee, and so that's wrong, okay? All right, you see the difference between... So what we need to think about today as we tackle this argument about Right? The argument is that we need to fully instrumentalize the Snake River, an ecological whole, in order to save Mother Earth, another ecological whole, right? That's the argument, right? And as I will try to demonstrate to all of you today, if we plug in Mother Earth and, in the role of one entity with moral status, right, on the lifeboat, right? Mother Earth is the human, let's say, the 4 humans, right? And then the Snake River ecosystem, Snake River water resources, the Snake River whole is the German Shepherd. If we have to instrumentalize one or the other, then the Reganite deontological argument is going to conclude, as our student argued last week, that in fact, okay, that's a valid argument, okay? We do need, water resource managers in the Snake River Basin are obligated to instrumentalize the Snake River Basin in order to preserve the larger and more comprehensive and more important ecological whole of Earth's climate systems, right? And then that's a valid argument, right? But if you adopt this more stringent deontological line of reasoning that I point out by using this chimpanzee to human heart example, if Earth is analogous to the human and the Snake River Basin and its Snake River salmon runs are analogous to the chimpanzee, then it's not morally permissible, right? And why is that anyway? Why is that? Because, well, that's where we're going to get to. Okay, it may be that under this more stringent deontological analysis, we do not have. In fact, we have obligations to restore Snake River salmon runs, regardless of consequences to the ecosystemic whole because of what humans are doing. Anyway, is that tantalizing enough to keep you all mentally present until the very end of class? Because that's where I'm going to try to go. It's an amazing argument, and I'm grateful to the student who presented it last week, because it's given me a lot of food for thought. And we'll be able to differentiate consequentialist environmental ethics from non-consequentialist, right? Because most consequentialist environmental ethics feel very comfortable with that line of reasoning that our community member last week presented, right? It makes sense, right? If the integrity of the eco-whole, the ecological whole of Mother Earth, which is the most comprehensive ecological whole of all, is seriously at risk, and it's been demonstrated to the resource manager's satisfaction that keeping the 4 lower Snake dams and all other dams in place in the Snake River is part of a rational response to anthropogenic climate destabilization, then many consequentialists are satisfied by that, right? But at the very least, look, after a while I've tailored down my ambitions in a philosophy class, okay? Because I realize that most of my students just haven't had very many philosophy classes. So I've really kind of scaled back my hope and expectation for my students. And at this point, it's really just gotten to the point where if my students will begin to seriously appreciate the value of a non-consequentialist analysis of natural resource policy, then I will be happy, okay? And there is something seriously flawed from a neo-Kantian, from a non-consequentialist perspective. There's something seriously flawed with the argument that we are morally obligated to sacrifice Snake River salmon runs for the good of Earth's ecological whole, of Earth's climate system. There's something seriously flawed with that. And I wanted to bring up some of Heidegger's reflections to help demonstrate that. But it's really a form of, when people first begin studying ethics, when people first begin studying moral philosophy, the mistake that is most commonly made is they assume that they know what the right is. And then the objective of moral philosophy is to figure out how to get there, right? But that's putting the cart before the horse, right? Moral philosophy throws into question what the good is. right? And the good for a non-consequentialist is never the result of some kind of consequence. The good is never properly described as some sort of consequence. And so what I'm trying to steer you all away from is consequent. All right, I really am. I'm trying to steer you away from consequentialist reasoning and away from the idea that that we have a solution. Okay? We don't have a solution. And it may be that the argument, practically speaking, prudentially speaking, the argument may be sound. Okay? We ought to sacrifice Snake River salmon runs for the good of Earth's climate systems. Right? You see how that all works, right? It does seem to be a compelling argument. And I wish, quite honestly, that everyone who debates the future of resource management in the Snake River Basin would accept the reality that leaving the dams in place, leaving the 4 lower Snake dams in place, condemns resource managers to a future of constantly intervening in the ecosystem. For example, by vacuuming up the smolts and transporting them around the dams, right? That oftentimes the mere concept, the utilitarian argument about resource policy doesn't accept the reality that lower Snake Dam removal is what I said last week, the sine qua non. Without that, nothing else in terms of salmon preservation and restoration is going to move forward, right? And so, not enough of those who want to defend the status quo are willing to accept that. Okay, we are facing either a future of no upper basin salmon runs. Okay, if we leave all the dams in place. And that future may be, as was argued last week, that may be the necessary future, right? But we have a stark choice. We can't keep dilly-dallying and pretending that we can have both. Okay, the long-term trends are that without continual intervention by the Army Corps of Engineers, Snake River salmon runs will all go extinct. Okay, unless we speed up the river, right? So, we can't, anyway, all right, enough of that. Okay, so I've got some pages of notes. Let's get into, let's spend another 15 minutes or so introducing ourselves to social ecology, and then we'll circle our way back around to a discussion of the lower Snake dams and this argument, okay, about the argument as I have it identified here. Total instrumentalization, all right? This is the argument that was presented in class by our community member last week. Okay, our community member last week was very reluctant to accept the empirical kinds of claims that I'm making, but as I said, I wish all resource managers would just accept those claims because I think they're really very hard. If you look at long-term trends, leaving the dams in place results in extinction.